Hello, this is Clarity Design, and today we're just going to have a quick look at using textures and colour inside Maya. I suppose one of the first questions I get asked by students once they've learnt the very basics of how to make objects is how do they change the colour of an object. For this you need to start using a slightly different menu over here that's not the channel box. What I've got set up in the scene here is a basic cube which I've deleted 3 sides of, and 3 spheres, so I can demonstrate some samples for you. Now there's a little button here which is showing or hiding the attribute editor, and if you click on that you'll get a more extensive view of whatever you've got selected at the time. So at the moment I've got this ball selected and this ball selected now, and you'll notice that right at the very end of the tabs, let's just go along these tabs at the top, and right at the very end we've got Lambert 1, and you can see that Lambert 1 is actually attached to all 3, in fact all of the objects in the scene at the moment. Okay, so all of the objects have this Lambert 1 attached to it. The way you've got to think about adding colour or applying texture and rendering inside Maya is that Maya uses lots of little blocks that attach together, and one of those blocks, or a number of those blocks, can be to do with building textures. Lambert 1 is the basic building block of texture that Maya has when you first open it. If you want to see more details about textures, we can use a special window that's inside rendering editors. Rendering is when you apply not just a colour but a feel or a texture, a surface to an object, and it's the hypershade is the one that you're looking for. So we can open that window up, and you'll see in the hypershade that there's some basic objects that are, or basic textures that already exist inside Maya, the main one being Lambert 1. This window can be a little bit confusing to begin with. You don't need to worry about it too much. I'm going to leave it open and I'll minimise it and I'll come back to it. You can see that there's a number of different materials down here that you can play around with and have a look at, and they can be a little bit overwhelming when you first start. We want to keep this fairly simple, so we're just going to apply some colours and then maybe do a couple of effects. But what I want you to understand when we do this is that the Lambert itself is made up of a number of blocks that have inputs and outputs. Okay, so each texture is made up of these blocks, and you start to build a network of these blocks together to make more complex textures. So the easiest way to apply a texture when you're first starting out, you could use the hypershade, and you can right click and you can apply it just by right clicking and holding that down. You can go and apply it to whatever you've got selected, okay, and assign to the selection. Okay, that's one way of doing them. So you can build your textures inside this window if you want, and then apply them later on. But the easiest, simplest way is to go directly to the object, right click, and assign a new material to the object. When using materials, you want to rename them. But first of all, we just need to apply one. Now, Lambert is a basic flat colour like the one we've got to begin with, so we'll use that. Blin is another one that you'll use quite a lot. Fongy and Distropic is used for glass, and Fong and Fongy you might use quite a lot. When you get a little bit better at Maya, you'll be looking at some of these MI and MIA textures. These ones will only be shown when you render with something called Mental Ray, and this lesson we're going to be using Maya software to render the images, so you mustn't use any of those to begin with. So let's just have a look at a Lambert. So let's just apply a new Lambert. So you can see here it's got Lambert 2. I'm going to rename that text 1. You can give it a more sensible name if you want, and all I'm going to do is just going to click on these tabs. So these are the properties, all the properties to do with this current texture at the moment, what I've got sorted there. So I'm just going to click on that colour tab, and I can pick up whichever colour I want there. And you can see immediately it's refreshed in the scene, it's changed to that colour. You've got transparency here, so I can make it so it's partially visible, partially translucent. We've got an ambient colour, and you can play around with these quite a lot to get the effect that you want. You'll notice that the orange ambient colour doesn't show up in this viewport at the moment. That's partly to do with my graphics card and the setting that I've got onto it. So how to see this and as it's going to look, in the final render. What I want to do is just go to View here, and I'm just going to switch on Camera Settings. I'm just going to switch on the resolution gate so I can see what's actually going to be in the image when I render it. And then I'm going to go to the top, and this button here is just going to do a basic render. I'm not going to go into changing render settings or anything, that's another lesson. But we'll just go into that, and you can see what that looks like and what that material looks like. So that's a basic material. Let's go to this outside cube, and I'm just going to assign a new texture to that. So assign new material again on the right click, and this time I'm going to put a blin on, which is a reflective material. We'll just change the colour of that to something a little bit lighter, but still in the greys. And you'd expect a reflective material like a blin. You can see down here that we've got stuff to do with specular shading. We can make that brighter, we can make it more reflective. Now you'd expect, if it's reflective, to be able to see the reflection of this object in that surface, but when we render it, you'll notice that there are no reflections in the scene at the moment. So that object is not being reflected on the sides. We need to switch on a couple of things to make that happen. This is called ray tracing, and you see ray tracing option is just down here. So I can switch on reflections just inside there, and inside my options here, inside the Layer tab, this is just in the render options. Just to go back on that, just left click on the render options there. You'll need to go to the Layer software tab, and you need to just go to, you see ray tracing quality down here, you just need to switch that on there as well. With those two ticks done, then you'll start getting your reflections in other objects. You start to see what that looks like. So the next question is, well, this is great and everything, now I can colour objects. You should think about, some people like to apply different textures to different faces. This is not the best way of texturing. It's much better to think about separating these faces off. If you want them to be a different colour, separating those faces off as a different object, and then colouring them as a different object, which reflects more what happens in real life. When you're texturing in real life, obviously you don't have a material that goes from wood to glass in real life. You always have two different materials that are joined together somehow. So it's better to think about it that way rather than trying to change faces. It just gets a little bit clunky and square and difficult to interact with when you're trying to apply lots of different surface textures to the same object. You can do it by selecting faces and assigning a new texture just as we've done before, but it's not the best way to do it. So another thing that kids ask me to do is, can I make it glow? So let's just assign a new material to this one, and we'll just let's just make that a green colour. Oh, sorry, I made a mistake there because that is still Lambert 1. Did not assign a new material to it. Let's just try that again. There we go. Yeah, so I'll just make it a Lambert, and we'll change that to a green colour. Got there this time. Excellent. You notice it says Lambert 3, and we'll call that glow text so that we know that it is texture. And just down here next to the next one down, the next icon down here, arrow here, just click there and you've got special effects, and you can switch on a glow. As soon as you switch that on, that'll start making it glow. You can make it really glow or glow a little bit. So you can see that that's starting to glow a little bit. Now if I click hide source, and I'll just re-render that area, and you'll see that now I've got the glow without the source. Let's just turn that up. And you can see that glow starting to happen. So quite a nice little effect, especially if you're trying to do things like lasers, guns, explosions, stuff like that. You can have this nice effect. It's not a real fix. You can see that we've got issues over here with oh no, that's because I didn't re-render it. But you will get issues with reflections and refractions. It's quite a cheap effect. It's happening on the objects, and it will go through walls. Glow effects will go through walls. So you might find that later on you'll have to find other ways of doing this when it's more advanced. But it's quite a nice cheap trick to start with. The next thing that people ask is, can I use my own textures, things, images that I've got or I've made in Photoshop? Well, yes, that's how the more advanced engineers start to apply textures. Is they actually use Photoshop and generate custom textures for each model that they do. But for a basic start, we can just assign a new material again, and this time once I've applied my my material, let's go Lambert, I can actually, just scrolling back up to the top, instead of clicking on the colour icon, just changing the colour, I can use one of these buttons here, and you can use this for any of these down here, any of these options. I can just click on this. This is the mapping button, and remember I said about how it's connecting different objects, different little bits together. Well, this is going to connect another object to this colour. So I just click on the map button, and one of the options down there's all sorts of options here for different textures that you can play around with, but the option that I'm going to go with now is file. I click on that. It hasn't applied the file, it's just applied the extra node that we're going to attach the file to. So I need to go to the folder here on image name. I'll just go and pick well, actually I'm going to pick Gollum from my images. Hopefully that's going to open up, and there we go. Let's put him on the surface. So you can see Gollum here is a PNG, and PNGs obviously it remembers the transparency. So you've got a nice deformed Gollum on the surface there, and if I render that up, it looks a little bit weird, but it's basically there. So you're getting a general idea. So selecting that object, I can go and edit that texture. I can play around with it some more. You can see it's been, because it's a PNG, it's automatically attached it to the transparency as well, so it's reading that transparency data from the PNG as well. So let's see what that looks like in the Hypershade just to finish off, because this has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour. So the original texture that we had, the Lambert one, let's just erase that. So the initial Lambert one looks something like this with the inputs and outputs. Nice simple structure. Let's wipe that off. And then Lambert 4, which I forgot to rename, which is my texture with Gollum on it, looks more like this. And you can see that we've got these different nodes that are attached together to make this more complex texture that we've got here, and that's basically how it works. And if you understand that, you can start to understand how you build it. There's lots of information here that you can start tapping into if you start hovering over these things.